Welcome to Bob Riding's Indicator. We are this year's proud sponsor of the Herald and Review Preps. To all the players, coaches, and fans out there, we wish you a very successful season. Remember, for all your automotive needs, come see us at Bob Riding's Indicator across from Caterpillar.
Hi, and welcome to Preps Preview Semifinal Edition. Now we're getting pretty deep into the season now. I'm Justin Conn. This is Gareth Sleger. Had some big games last week. There was the one close game. The other two weren't so close, but of course the big one was Mount Zion getting beat by Charleston. I think that a lot of people felt like, after that first game, that Mount Zion handled them so easily that they could do it again. But and I know there were some differences. There were some injuries on Mount Zion's side, some guys that had come back for Charleston, but still, I think the Charleston team that played Saturday, I don't know what happened to that team early in the season, but a lot of talent there, and Mount Zion, played well, but came down to the 2-point conversion play. So kind of a great quarterfinal game to watch for sure.
Yeah, I guess they were able to balance their attack a little bit too, because Stroud had over 100 yards passing. So they did what they needed to do. It was just that 2-point conversion, I guess.
Right, and and Mount Zion had a chance to come down at the end and try to win the game. And of course they were against the wind at that point. It seemed like the wind picked up a little bit late in the game, and the last pass that got intercepted, it floated in the wind a little bit from Stroud. So a tough way to lose, and I know that Mount Zion never got past the quarters, and of course Coach Scott Davis that was his 9th trip and hadn't got past the quarters yet. So a lot of frustration there, but I think that that's a pretty good season for Mount Zion in Davis's first year. They hadn't got to the quarterfinals in a long time. Even the great run, the great 3 years that Dave Smith had, they never made the quarters. So, and
considering the injuries they had too, with Naylor going off, I mean, he affects both sides of the ball too. So
absolutely. And the other two games were kind of what we expected, I think, with the way the way Maroa Forsyth played against Marshall. A little ugly early, though.
Yeah, it was. The first quarter was, they each lost 2 fumbles, and then Maroa opened up the second quarter with another lost fumble. But Maroa did what they needed to do. They came up with some big stops on defense. They still allowed 300-plus total yards of offense, which they rarely ever do. Their run defense really allows 100 yards rushing. So, and they had a 251. Marshall did. So it was, but they had that goal line stand to start the fourth quarter, and Drew Fredrickson had a big interception in the end zone at the end of the first half to stop 2 big drives.
A couple things there. That is the second time in the playoffs now that Maroa has given up over 200 yards rushing, so maybe a little bit of a concern there, because during the season teams just couldn't run on him. And the other thing is with talking about Drew Fredrickson, and I know you talked about Maroa's secondary in your advanced story. He was a guy. I remember he came in against Tolono Unity in the game earlier this year. Stells Reedy had been playing some defensive back, got a little banged up. They wanted to save him at quarterback. They were a little nervous, actually, in that game about putting Fredrickson in, but boy, ever since they've kind of let him loose at D-back, he's been a stud. So, I think they got to be really happy with the way that whole secondary is playing.
Everybody that's come off the bench, too, like when Stells Reedy goes out when they're 14 up, people just step up. And I think it's more to do with the front 7 pressure on the quarterback, and they just kind of chuck it up there because they don't know what else to do.
Right. But, I mean, if you're going to chuck it up there, that's a secondary that can make you pay, no doubt about it.
And Stells Reedy had some big tackles in the secondary. Actually, no, when they had their first fumble in the first quarter, Stells Reedy had a tackle to save, Marshall player from running into the end zone.
As the quarterback he did, right.
And then he tackled Strom Strom had like a 70-yard run to set up their only touchdown. But he would have scored right away if it wasn't for Stells Reedy just knocking him out of bounds at the 10-yard line.
That's another thing, too. They've given up 200 yards rushing against 2 really good running teams in Carlinville and Marshall. I mean, those teams are good. I mean, 200 yards for them in a game isn't really that great. So, right. And also in those 2 games, they've given up a total of 0 and 7 points. So, you really can't find a whole lot of fault with what Moreau is doing right now. And then the other game from Saturday was the Tuscola-Arcola game, the Cola War game, which, pretty much went down like how we thought that would too.
Oh, the stories leading up to it, I guess, was the most interesting part with the chicken capture and all that.
Exactly. And Arcola is a team that, even to start the playoffs, even to start the season, I don't think that most of us felt like it was going to be a quarterfinal team. We're going to take a look back. We put out a preseason sort of a predictions, and Gareth wasn't here for that, so he's going to kind of call Leroy Bridges and I out on some of the at least one of those picks. And I have a couple here where I'm going to look at it and say, boy, we were a little off there. Arcola being one of those teams, we said they would go 5-4, missed the playoffs because of a low playoff point total. They ended up going 6-3, getting in, winning 2 games, and going 8-4. So that was a team that we underestimated a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I had nothing to do with those selections, but the one that was kind of, I guess, surprising, I don't think it was a bad pick, picking St. Teresa to go into the quarterfinals, but they just kind of bowed, like we've talked before, they've just kind of bowed out in the late in the season and that first round against Macomb.
We picked them to go 10-2, get to the quarterfinals, which is a usual St. Teresa year, honestly, and it looked like they were on their way to that. It really did. In fact, it looked like they were on their way to maybe a 1-loss regular season. In fact, that 10-2, I think that I would have told you heading into that Monticello game in week 9 that we had hit the nail on the head with that one. And then all of a sudden, and I've said it before, I still am not quite sure what happened there. But they bow out. They end up with 3 losses and just the 7 wins. So yeah, we overestimated them. Yeah. A couple other teams that we underestimated, and probably the biggest one would be Charleston. We picked them to go 6-4. In fairness, they're a program honestly that had underachieved a lot of years. I mean, a lot of talent has come through that program. I mean, I can think of a lot of years where they had some great running backs, some really good defensive players. But this year they had a more complete team, I would say, and for whatever reason, this year they finally put it together. And I can remember at the start of the year even Brian Halsey kind of saying, hey, he felt the pressure to perform, for that team to perform this year. Maybe, he kind of felt like maybe he wasn't the right fit for them. Well, boy, they really came through for him. We picked them to go 6-4. They go 11-1. That was the team that we were the most off on. A couple other teams, Cerro Gordo, we picked to go 4-5, and
looked that way at the start of the season.
Yeah, we really looked. That was looking, like we were right on there. And then, of course, they got hot. With them, it's funny because Cody Woolen really stepped up for them this year. In the past, his older brother Colin Woolen had been a really good player at Cerro Gordo, and Cody had always kind of, played here and there. He played when he was a sophomore, and I mean, he looked good, but I don't know that I expected him to have quite the season he did. And then, of course, the transfer of D. Woods in was big for them, and all this. And, the line came together, and all of a sudden they were really formidable.
They changed their formation throughout the season to an I formation, just shoved it down people's throats, and that's kind of what put them into the playoffs.
A great coaching job by Andy Curley there. And he was a guy I remember talking to when he first took over Cerro Gordo that said, we're going to run whatever offense works for us. I'm not married to any offense, and he proved that this year.
Yeah.
Another team that we only 2 wins off on Argenna. We picked them to go 2-7. They went 4-5, but honestly, they were so much better than I thought they would be. I thought they'd lost so much from a team that kind of underachieved the year before, and then with a new coach and Chad Eisenminger, and it's just so tough in the Ocala breakthrough. And they had a season like the team 2 years ago did, where honestly they were a 4-win team, but there's a lot of playoff teams that they would have beat this year. And, it's that's sort of the downside of being in a tough conference. It pays off for the teams that make the playoffs in the Ocala, like Tuscola, Maroa, who all of a sudden are so battle-tested that they, start running people over in the playoffs. But then there's a team like Argenna who, would probably, probably deserve to be in the playoffs and probably would win a game in the playoffs, but it's just a little too tough. They only win 4, and they're on the outside looking in. And you know what? It's just there's going to be a lot of teams that happens to in the Ocala over the years. So we hit on some. We hit some nails on the head, but people are always going to call you out for the ones that you messed up on. But I will say I called KZ Maroa to start the year. I said that they would be in the semifinals together. So start of the year, I picked KZ to win that game
and State,
and to win State. Don't
forget that.
I sort of backtracked on that one a little bit and feel like maybe Maroa has been, and KZ has some injuries, and Maroa has been a lot better than I thought they would.
That's going to be a good defensive battle too.
It's going to be a great game. It usually has been a really good game, a really tough, hard-fought game. Last year, Maroa kind of sort of had some big plays early in the game against KZ, and then was able to kind of hold on. And you kind of feel like maybe Maroa doesn't have that same big strike capability, but probably maybe better at sustaining drives this year. So, I think that's going to be an awfully tough game, and it's at KZ. The last time Monroe had to go to Casey, that was in the quarters a few years ago. They lost. And I know Casey fans hate when this gets brought up, but it was a really muddy field that day, and it ended up being a tough offensive day for both teams, but Casey won the game. So, you know, a lot of history between those two teams, and there's also, all of a sudden, over the last 3 years, been a lot of history between Tuscola and Brown County. This is the third straight year that they'll be playing in the playoffs. And, you know, of course, Tuscola won the first two, but they've been really close games. So, you know, you probably expect another really good one there. And in the other game involving an area team is Charleston and Rochester. You know, you got to figure Charleston's going to be a pretty big underdog going into that one.
Yeah, I mean, state reigning champ. So,
yeah.
But you know, they've kind of surprised us throughout the season as. You know.
That's exactly right. Rochester has, of course, Oklahoma State-bound quarterback in Wes Lunt, so that's a big task for them. So, you know, we'll be at our games, of course, again this weekend. Got basketball stuff starting, so it's a really busy time in the high school sports world right now. So make sure you check us out on HR Preps, and we'll see you out there.